Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. I am Dr. Douglas Peak, and I am your Salty Pastor. Boy, it's so good to be back. It really is. And I'm starting to realize just how much I really love coaching people up in their faith. I was just spending some time over the last week and a half or so, just kind of thinking about, wow, what is this new reality that I have to live in look like or feel like, or what is it going to be like? And what I kind of went back to is some of the things that started me out 35, 40 years ago. And that is, I really love it when people discover things for themselves. I really do. It reminds me of something that Kim and I did over 30 years ago. This was early in our marriage before we had any kids. Kim found this ministry in Honduras called Heart to Honduras. And it had been started by a man named Charlie Smith. And he had over 30 years of experience in the Peace Corps. He'd been all over the world. And if you're familiar with the Peace Corps, what they try to do is they try to go in and they try to build infrastructure projects in third world countries, particularly those that are extremely impoverished. And so he'd been around and he'd done a number of these things. And he learned some things over the course of that 30, 35 years of experience. And so he left the Peace Corps, kind of retired from that, and he started this ministry called Heart to Honduras. And he learned a couple things. First, when he started this new ministry, he said, I want everybody to know is that what I learned is that if an outside group comes in and builds an infrastructure project, doesn't matter whether it's in Africa, Indonesia, Latin America, or South America, because he'd been all of those places and built infrastructure projects there. He goes, the human nature is the same. No matter how important it was, it would fall into disrepair and be abandoned. And the reason why is because the local people, the native population, didn't build it. They enjoyed the benefit for a period, but when it broke, they just went back to the way they did it before. Second, he realized is this, that the only things that last is when the local population builds it themselves. Because what that does is that inspires them, it educates them, and it appeals to that notion inside every human spirit, that human nature aspect that wants to improve and grow. They have to build it. They have to understand its significance. They have to know how to fix it. And if you do it for them, this concept in Honduras took off, because what they did is they went in and they said, we're not here to come in and build anything or fix anything. We're going to find local village leaders, local village pastors, and we're going to educate them and encourage them and then let them build their communities. And it just took off. It went from one village to, somewhere 30 to 50 different villages. They built schools, they built churches, they increased agricultural output, they were solving hunger and poverty. It was just unbelievable what this thing did. And what I enjoyed the most with Kim is we would take groups of people down there to see this. And the joy was when they could experience it and see it for themselves for the first time. Because a lot of times they would come down and they have this attitude of, well, we're going to go in there, we're going to do all this stuff, we're going to make it better. And they'd show up and say, okay, well, you can't do that. You can't give anybody anything. You can't give away stuff. If you're going to do that, you have to give it to the pastor and he distributes it. And we're here to ask them what they want done. And then we're here to serve them and labor for them. And that we want to prop them up. We don't want to come in over them. And so people would get this. And the things that they would learn, it was just absolutely phenomenal. One story in particular that just sticks with me forever is that we started taking dental teams down there. And we took dental students who were in their third year, because dental school is 3 years. At that time it was. And it's interesting because you can graduate from dental school without actually, back then, ever extracting a tooth, right? Because it's just so rare in America to come across abscesses and, severe, rotted teeth and impacted roots and these types of things because, we've done fairly well with dental care. So we started taking these people. We had a dentist. He's well experienced, kind of an older guy, and he'd done a lot of oral surgery. And so we would go down there and in 1 week, they would extract over 1,000 teeth. You would see everything that you'd only seen in a textbook as a dental student. So we started taking these dental students down. It became really popular through this one dental school in Nebraska for kids or young people, I guess, want to go down there and do this. And I remember there was this gal, top of her class. She was the best student, the most accomplished, and she went down there and she is, well, I'm going to be an oral surgeon. That's what I'm going to do. I said, okay. So the dentist put her in the line and, we're triaging, we're bringing all these people in. And she did more oral surgery in that week than she would probably do in the first 10 years of her career. So, maybe it's a little hyperbole, but she did a lot. She probably did at the beginning of the week, in the first few days, I would say she was doing somewhere 10 to 20 a day. Right. So it was huge. And what happened is we get towards the end of the week, there's or the 10 days that we were down there, we get towards the second half of it, and she starts spending more time with the kids and working with the kids. And then, at the end of the thing, we do a big giant debrief. And it's really interesting because I was always asked these students, some of them were Christians, some of them weren't, and stuff like that. I'd say, well, what is the biggest thing that you learned? Did you have any revelations being down here? And this gal stepped up and she said, I always wanted to be the best. I always wanted to achieve the highest honor, and oral surgery was that for me. And she goes, what I've discovered is I don't like oral surgery. So I've decided to change my entire career path into pediatric dental care, because what she loved more than anything else was being with the kids and helping the kids and getting them on a trajectory towards oral hygiene and dental health. Man, that was exciting to see that young lady have her eyes open, experience it for herself, learn something about herself, and then have it impact her in such a powerful way. And what I'm enjoying about this, and I think what I've enjoyed about it more than anything else, is that I'm coaching people. And coaching is helping them experience things for themselves. And when they are in the game and they are experiencing the benefit of the victory and the defeat, that brings me joy. So having people grow and live life and experience joy is bringing me joy. Now, back to our main principle. Last week, in the first podcast this week, we talked about how if we want to live towards greater mature faith, which means more joy, more peace, more, pace, life is just better all around, right? All of the fears and the anxieties and the stressors just start to bleed away. And we've talked about how Arthur Brooks gave us just kind of a little paradigmatic idea, set up a little paradigm, and that is happiness comes from two things, not one thing. The first thing is the things that bring you greater joy, peace, and happiness, you need to increase in your life. And he calls those faith, family, friends, and meaningful work. And he says, but you also have to decrease the things that bring unhappiness, because you can have things that are bringing you more happiness, but also increasing your happiness. A perfect example of this is friendships, right? You can pick friends. You say, well, I have a community, and that raises your happiness level. But what if some of the friends that you have in your community are drama queens? And so what that's going to do is that's going to increase your unhappiness at the same rate. So you're happy you have community, but your unhappiness is increasing at the same rate. So that's not joy. So the key is that happiness needs to grow and unhappiness needs to decrease. That is the sweet spot. And I talked about on Tuesday of this week how misconceptions often increase our unhappiness, even though we're doing good things that we think should increase our happiness. I hope you catch that. And one of the misconceptions that I talked about is that a lot of Americans believe that Christianity is designed to produce moral purity within a person. And that is, well, Christianity, when you follow Jesus, is all about becoming a better person. Now, that happens, but that's actually not the point of the gospel message. It's not about what we talked about on Tuesday, the law, because that's what the Mosaic law was. It was, here's your standard of behavior, live to the standard of behavior, everything goes great. Well, what they found is no one could ever live up to it. And Jesus said over and over again, the point of the law was to show you the need for a sacrificial redemption. Paul talks about it. The law wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. He's not trying to say it's good or evil. What he's saying, it was a tool to show us that we could never be pure ourselves, that we needed a savior, and that was Jesus Christ. And that's the essence of the gospel message, is that Jesus Christ came to save sinners, Paul said, of whom I am the foremost. So I have a lot of kindred spirit with Paul right there. Jesus Christ came to save me because I am an imperfect sinner. You could say, like Paul, I am the foremost sinner, and the issue is how can you be at peace with that and still feel good about yourself? Well, I think it's really important to understand this misconception and get it back from moralism. That's what I call the misconception of saying that the purpose of Christianity is to produce moral purity within you. I want to move it away from that back to its original intent, and that is a redemptive mindset. Okay? Now, moral development is a byproduct of authentic redemption. When a person authentically is following Jesus, their faith develops within them a higher moral code, and it develops within them a new conscience. Their conscience is reborn, and that conscience starts to guide them. However, the misconception is that moral purity is the focus and goal of being a Christian. And yet, that is misleading. Do you remember what Jesus said in John chapter 13? He said, Jesus, in John chapter 13, it starts off with the observance of the Lord's Supper, okay? Then he washes the disciples' feet in verses 5 through 20. And then in verses 21 through 30, he predicts that he will be betrayed. And so they're also like, wow, who's going to betray Jesus? What's going on? And so after all this is going on, verse 31, Jesus says the following. John records this. Now, therefore, once Jesus had left, he said, or they had all gone out, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. And if God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him immediately. So he's talking about his death and resurrection here, right? Little children, I am with you a little while longer. You shall seek me. And as I have said to the Jews, I now say to you also, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, but that you also love one another. By this, here's the money quote, I might add. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, my followers, if you have love for one another. So the principle here says this is how people know, not this is how they know you're my disciple. Not that you have a morally pure ethic, that you do everything right. What it means is that you love one another. The new command he gives is love, not compliance. Now, what command is he talking about? The new command is different than the old command. And the old command was the Old Testament covenant, the Mosaic law. And the Mosaic law said, always do the right thing. And when you fall short, pay a price through sacrifice, right? So many Christians today, the misconception is they will know you are my disciples because you always do the right thing. Now, are we supposed to endeavor to do the right thing? Absolutely. Can we always do the right thing? Probably not, but we can certainly try, and we can get better. We can become better human beings. But that is a byproduct of the redemptive act of Jesus in our lives. It's not the primary goal. And if those get out of whack, guess what? You have a mess. A perfect example of how this works out everyday life, and that is you get married and you tell your spouse, I want to love you till death do us part. We're going to love you, in sickness and in health, in times and sorrows. And so what do a lot of couples do? They come together, they fall in love, they have a great marriage, and then they have kids, right? Which is the byproduct. So they start to have kids. And one of the first things that happens when you have kids is that you have to develop a partnership to raise the kids, right? It takes a lot of energy, a lot of money, and a lot of time, and a boatload of sacrifice. So together you're raising these kids. Well, it's real easy during your kid years, for that 20 or 25 years or 30 years of your life, to think that the primary goal of our marriage is to raise kids. And so what happens, you raise these kids, they leave the house, and you look at the other person and go, who are you? Do I even know you? Let alone, am I still in love with you? That happens more often than not. Right now in our society, there's an explosion of divorces among, of the population of 50-year-olds to 65-year-olds. They call it a silver divorce. It is the second highest category for the rate of divorce, right? The highest category is between 22 years and 27 or 28 years. And so the second highest is a silver divorce. Why is that? Well, because they forgot that the primary purpose of being married is being in love, and that's the cornerstone of the whole family unit, is their marriage, right? Everything else is secondary to that. But you're so busy raising kids, you can kind of get out of balance. This is the exact, is raising kids bad? No. Should you put a lot of effort into it? Yeah. What happens when raising kids is the priority over your marriage? Not good outcomes. And that's exactly what I'm talking about here. There's a subtle difference, but this subtle difference has significant implications for your faith, right? And the difference, the significant implication is the difference between a fear mindset in how you approach faith versus a mindset that is discipline oriented. Now, what in the world do I mean by that? Well, if your goal, your focus in following Jesus is to become a morally pure person, you're going to spend a lot of time thinking, what is the standard? And then asking yourself, am I living up to it? And then you're going to pray that God give you the strength to live up to it. Then you're going to ask God to discipline you to live up to it. You might even find accountability partners to help confront you when you're not living up to it. And so all the emphasis subconsciously in your faith becomes, am I living up to the standard? And what this does is this is called a fear-based approach to personal or spiritual growth. And there is a huge fear of failure in this approach. Now, I went in and I wanted to share with you just a little bit about educational theory. So I went in, I talked to ChatGPT and some other AI, and I said, hey, when people are in a fear mindset, what does that do to impact their capacity to be educated or grow or learn new things? And it's really interesting. It says, well, the primary issue when a person's in a fear mindset, when it comes to education or learning or growing, personal improvement, is fear mindset. It's a fear of failure. Like, I'm not going to be able to do it or live up to the standard. And it significantly hinders the learning process. And here are the reasons that they laid out. Number one, it creates anxiety and stress. Do you have a lot of anxiety in your life? Are you stressed out all the time? Well, whether you know it or not, it has to do with a fear of failure. A fear of failure leads to a heightened anxiety, which negatively affects concentration and cognitive function. If you have a fear of failure, it's a lot harder to learn. When you don't have a fear of failure, it's easy to learn, right? Your stress response, when your body's under stress, guess what? It impairs the ability to think clearly and process information, okay? So if you have increased anxiety or increased stress, guess what? It makes growth and maturation much more difficult. So you want to get out of that frame of reference. Number two, stress and anxiety, fear of failure produces what they call avoidance behavior, all right? Procrastination, avoidance of conflict, reduced engagement. It's like, I just won't engage or be present. These things are called avoidant behaviors. Why do we exhibit these things? Well, we exhibit them because we are fearful of failure. It's hard to be hyper curious and fully engaged and take action when you're worried that you're going to mess it up, screw it up, you don't measure up, or so forth. The other thing that a fear of failure mindset does to you, and why it's so significant in slowing down spiritual growth, is because of what psychologists call negative self-talk. All right? Fear of failure produces self-doubt. This leads to negative thoughts about one's abilities, which can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, I can't do this, then you can't do it, and go, see, I told you so. An imposter syndrome, psychologists call this, and that's when an individual feels like they don't belong or they are not capable, which discourages them from even trying. So negative self-talk is one of the primary drivers of procrastination and avoidant behavior. It's one of the primary drivers of an increase in your fear of failure. And what this ends up in, and this is what I've talked about before, remember when I'm always saying it's not so much what you're thinking, but how you're thinking? Well, how you think becomes a fixed mindset. When you have a pattern of fear in your past, whether you know it consciously or subconsciously, and you exhibit things like negative self-talk, avoidance behavior like procrastination or reduced engagement, and you have increased anxiety or lots of stress in your life, then guess what? You have what is commonly known as a fixed mindset. It's a frame of reference. It is a way of thinking. Those who fear failure may adopt and develop a fixed mindset, believing that their abilities are unchangeable and they avoid challenges and they avoid any type of personal growth. There's a lack of resilience. When you have that mindset, that framework of thinking, you tend to give up early because you're unwilling to learn from your mistakes. And then you go back to avoidance. And that is, well, I'm just going to avoid that. I'm just going to avoid that. I'm just going to avoid that. And this is one of the reasons why I think older people, this is one of the things that I've been digging into in retirement and kind of just studying what do people happen as they age. If you get into your 60s and you start slowing down a little bit, one of the biggest things is people isolate. And one of the reasons why they isolate is because of these reasons. They have a fear mindset, right? They've got, you can't live into your 50s without broken relationships, failure at your job and career, failure in family at some level. You're going to have all these failures. And most people don't learn from their failures, or they have all this emotional pain from their failures. So what they do is subconsciously they start living a life of avoidance. They just avoid the potential of ever having that pain again. But you remember the old cliche, it is better to have loved than lost than to have never loved at all. And so I think it's because of this mentality, this mindset of that Christianity is designed to turn you into a morally pure person, that causes all of these outcomes in our life. It's a misconception. Wouldn't it be awesome? You think about it. Wouldn't it be awesome if you get into your 60s and you can get up each day and look at all your failures, all your mistakes, all your bad decisions from your past and sit down and go, yeah, I'm awesome. Yeah, I did all that stuff. Absolutely. No big deal. Well, why isn't it a big deal? Why can you say you're awesome? Remember I talked about how can you confront your failures and your mistakes and your shortcomings and your flaws and still feel good about who you are and where you're going? Because feeling good about who you are doesn't depend on you and what you did and how much you've grown. It has everything to do with the redemptive power of Jesus Christ in your life. You get to that point where you're saying, I'm not trying to have a righteousness of my own effort. I have a righteousness built on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Paul says in Philippians 3, I want to know him and the power of his resurrection. I rejoice in my failures. I rejoice in my flaws. I rejoice in that. That is really weird. Most people tell you today, boy, you need to have power words and power phrases to get over the negative self-talks. You need to write them out on sticky notes and put them on your mirror when you get ready in the morning. You gotta have that, pump you up kind of mentality. And yet Paul is saying something so weird. He's going, I rejoice in my flaws and my failures. He says, I don't want to go out and do them again, but I want to rejoice in them because it reminds me to rest, depend on, trust in the redemptive power of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I don't want to forget those things because they remind me how much I need a Savior. It is a trustworthy statement, deserving full acceptance, that Jesus Christ came to save sinners, of whom I am the foremost. So here's Paul, probably one of the most confident, faith-filled people that you can ever emulate, saying to you that the greatest aspect of his psychological, emotional, spiritual strength, his faith strength, comes not from what he's accomplished by becoming morally pure, but by realizing how much he's been redeemed from his flaws and failures. And he does that by not forgetting them, but being redeemed by them. I want you to think about that. I really do. I encourage you, my friends, to stop looking at all the things you are not and spend your mental focus on who you have been made in Jesus Christ. And that's called reframing the way you think. Don't forget your mistakes, reframe them. And that is, they've been forgiven and redeemed by the blood of Christ. Be realistic about what your faith is supposed to produce in you. Right? We keep thinking, well, if I had more discipline, or if I had more prayer time, if I had more quiet time, my faith would get stronger. Really? Would it? Would it really change the way you feel? I think you should evaluate and be realistic and ask yourself a simple question. Does my faith get stronger when I do more things? I don't know. I don't know you need to do more things to have a stronger faith. Maybe you need to do less things, like remove the things that undermine your faith and the misconceptions about your faith. Maybe you need less, not more. Finally, I think you should expect setbacks, failures, problems, issues. But don't get mad at yourself when it happens. Don't get disgusted with yourself. Just realize you are a redemptive work in progress. It's just another opportunity to remind you that this whole thing doesn't depend on you and your effort, but on the power and majesty of Jesus Christ, the power of his blood, the power of his redemption, the power of his kingdom running in your blood now through the Holy Spirit. Think about those things. I just want to say thank you, everybody. I'm going to sign off now. And keep going to our YouTube channel, The Salty Pastor, and like and subscribe. Tell other people to like and subscribe. Also, if you share this with a friend and you're listening now, friend, go to the website and you can sign up for a weekly email. It's right there at the top. You go on there, boom, and we send out an email every Monday morning at 5 a.m. Mountain Standard Time to help you focus your thoughts and ideas for that week based on what I've said. And so I just think it's really great to remind you and encourage you in the growth of your faith. All right. So until then, this is Salty Pastor. And remember, what you believe about yourself is one of the most important things.